All right, I'm happy to affirm the resolution that America should adopt Canada's immigration system. Before we really get into the main crux of this debate, I want to put out some points of resolutional analysis. First off, we should define obviously what Canada's immigration system is. It's a system of immigration that basically uses points to determine a merit on whether you should enter the country. It's a merit-based system. Simply, the main categories of points that kind of are calculated to see if you qualify are that of language proficiency, education, and then age, skilled professions, and sponsorship. Basically, these are the major categories that kind of make up a system that says if you get enough of these points, you're kind of moved into a faster tier of immigration in the country. That's a basic idea of kind of what we'll be debating. The important thing I want to note here is that my second point of resolution analysis is that we're debating this on principle. Because immigration policy is so complicated, I think me and my opponent agree that we weren't necessarily going to attack a specific policy to debate, but as an idea, should we as a country pursue to try and go for a system that kind of implements a merit-based immigration system? With that in mind, I think we should establish some sort of weighing mechanism or an idea to determine should America, after all, pursue a Canadian immigration system. The weighing mechanism I propose is that of social well-being. It's quite obvious. Obviously, America should do what's best for American society, such as promoting quality of life, holding to American values, ideas and things that promote America's society's well-being. With that in mind, I really have two major contentions or arguments for the resolution. The first is that of systemic benefits. The A point under this is that of economic benefit. Now, it's only logical that when you have more skilled laborers coming to the country or laborers that understand the language better, you're going to see economic growth in the long term. This is backed up also by International Labor Office's study done in 2010 that talks about when you have a more skilled population and when you have more skilled workers, naturally that will lead to long-term economic growth. When you have a merit-based system that promotes these parts in immigration, naturally that will eventually lead to economic benefit. The B point under this is that of tailored policy. This is kind of the most important part of this contention is when the government has a database that allows it to determine what people are trying to enter the country on. Let's see, for example, when we saw a oil boom. If we had another oil boom and see a shortage of chemical and mechanical engineers, maybe they could give out more degrees to give out more visas to those people to try and fill that boom. Tailored policy can be made to benefit the economy. My final contention is that of American advocacy. The main point you can write down here is that of a Harvard study. 80% of Americans support a movement to a merit-based immigration program. This was published, I believe, about 10 days ago. And what it details is that Americans themselves want us to move to more of a Canada's immigration system. Is because of these inherent reasons of the economic benefits and because America wants us as a whole, I support the resolution.
Alrighty, so the first thing that I want to say is I agree with you on the basic resolutional analysis. We are looking at this as a question of what would be the best social well-being for America, and we are asking the question of whether or not America should move to a merit-based system or whether we should keep some variant of what we currently have. Now, you have two reasons to prefer moving to a merit-based system. The first was that you claim that there will be a systemic benefit with your A point of an economic benefit and your B point of a tailored policy. My first response to the economic benefit, you presented no evidence or analysis of this. It's just simply, oh, if we have high skilled workers, that'll be good. Well, why does that work? You got to give something here. Why exactly is that preferential? My second response to this is that a merit-based system pushes aside low skilled workers. But low-skilled workers are actually incredibly necessary to the American economy. We can see this from Christy DePena, Immigration Policy Counsel at the Niskanen Center, who says, quote, "It is beyond factual dispute that we need low-skilled immigrants to fill jobs. Over the past 10 years, there's been a marked decline in the rate of the American workforce participating in low-skilled jobs. In reality, immigration is a critical component of economic growth and industry success nationwide. Agriculture, fishing, and forestry, together a $215 billion industry, rely almost entirely on low-skilled immigrants," end quote. So the reason this matters is if we switch to this merit-based policy and only bring in these high-skilled immigrants, that pushes aside the low-skilled immigrants who America needs. We have industries that are entirely dependent on the influx of these low-skilled immigrants. So while it might work in Canada in certain instances, that doesn't mean that we should switch it here in America because we have entire fields of labor that require this low-skilled labor. For instance, in California, we are primarily driven by agriculture, which necessitates these low-skilled laborers, which is why we need to bring in immigrants who can do that sort of work. The next point you had was that of the tailored policy. My response here would be business, not government. We shouldn't have government decide who the best skilled immigrants are. We should let the businesses do that. Currently, we have the H-1B system, which is where businesses can sponsor an immigrant to come in and work for them. That's the way it should be. In fact, my final argument I'm going to make here is that the solution, if we want to bring in more merit-based, would be to increase the amount of available H-1B visas. Currently, we have it capped at 65,000, but the H-1B system is better than a merit-based system because businesses say, here's who I need to come and work for me. We will sponsor you to come. But the problem is, if it's capped at 65,000, well, we can't bring in that many. So the reason you should prefer the con in this round is, first of all, I have to respond to his contention too. American advocacy. My response would be simply populism. That's not an actual reason to prefer anything. So, but it would be better if we simply increase H-1Bs and.
All right, so I think I understand his argument. He says, that there are many different solutions and there are just better solutions out there. And I recognize his point, though I have to disagree with his conclusion. So I'm going to go and respond to my opponent's arguments. His first point was that I really brought up no evidence of economic benefit. Not only did I present basic logic that when you have a higher skilled workforce and smarter people in your country, naturally that will lead to more innovation and benefits. I also cited the same conclusion from the International Labor Office's study in 2010 that found the same thing. The best way to grow a society and an economy is through smart people. Naturally, when you have a country full of smarter people, better things are going to come about. That's empirically proven. His next point was about specifically a merit-based system. Our current system kind of has a large amount of industries run off of low-skilled laborers. Now, the problem with, for example, he presents the farming industry, the agriculture industry. The reason that industry even exists in the United States is because of not only one, government subsidization, because of tariff economic policies. This wouldn't even be a problem. These situations where we have a bunch of low-skilled, low-labor businesses we have very nationalistic economic policies. Those could easily be done away with a different solution. The important thing to note is there's also several million illegal immigrants that could probably fill those jobs anyway, and a lower class that can still fill those jobs. There are plenty of other areas than the couple 100,000 immigrants, legal immigrants that join every other year. There's many different ways to fill that gap. Not necessarily, if my opponent was to claim that it will create a severe problem, why doesn't he look at Canada and say, in Canada, after we saw this happen, Canada obviously will have industries like this. Did we see an actual major decrease in unemployment? Then we can have that talk. Next, he talks about business sponsoring. The important thing to note is even if we passed a main immigration program, this wouldn't necessarily just apply to businesses in general. Part of the point system that I referenced, part of the points come from sponsored. If you're sponsored, naturally, you're actually gives you more points if you're sponsored by a business or family member, like the current system. Basically, this is just an extension of the H-1B visa program into the main forms of immigration that we have currently. You can have both of those programs. This is just, in a sense, an extension of that. Having a Canadian immigration system doesn't necessarily require the abolishment of the H-1B visa program. If anything, it really is an extension of it. So this is a moot point. To his point about populism, the nation is supposed to be a representative republic, as in it's supposed to represent what people want in America. If the overwhelming majority of people in America want a system that follows a merit-based system, we should at least consider that and strive toward it. With that, I pass the mic.
Well, yeah, we should. We should consider things, but that doesn't mean that we go with them. We determine something based on whether or not it would actually work. We don't go with policies just because lots of people want something. If a lot of people want to kill themselves, that doesn't mean you go, okay, go ahead. That's just not the way we do things. The question is whether or not it would be, as you called it, social well-being. It's not, do they want it? It's, would it be good? We can ignore that point. The main argument that you have is that of the benefit. So we really have a direct clash on would the merit-based system have a benefit or a harm for Americans? That's really where this debate comes down to. Now, you responded by saying that the country would be better off if we had smart people coming in. I have two responses to this. My first response is that this is no different than the H-1B program. And you even kind of admitted this yourself. You're like, it's an extension of the H-1B program. Well, we already can solve for everything you're talking about with the H-1B system. There's no reason to switch to the Canadian system when all we need to do is keep the current American system and just allow more of it. We don't need to switch to the merit-based system. And then the second response here is that the American system is preferable. because the merit-based system is where government says, we believe that these are the people who have the most amount of merit, as opposed to in the American system where the businesses say, here, these are the people we want to hire, give them an H-1B visa. We've sponsored them, now give them an H-1B visa. It is preferable. In fact, you can actually look to the numbers here. Australia and Canada are good examples because they're the ones who actually have these the government-sponsored things. The Economist reports that in late 2013, an estimated 13.5% of points-tested immigrants who had arrived in Australia earlier that year were unemployed. But just 1% of immigrants who had got in because they were sponsored by a company were unemployed. Clearly, businesses are much better than officials at knowing what sort of people businesses want to hire, end quote. So what that's telling you is the businesses know who they're trying to get. Government doesn't. Government goes, here's a lot of points we can give, but government doesn't know what the businesses want. So it's preferable to go with simply the H-1B system, which is where the businesses sponsor them in the first place. Next, you talk about how nationalism is the problem. Well, my response is, if nationalism is the problem, don't switch to nationalism. Merit-based immigration is a nationalist policy. So why would we switch to that policy if that's the problem in the first place? You asked what happened in Canada. Well, two responses. My first response is that Canada is different. We're asking if we should switch to the American system. And my second response is that Canada actually suffers brain waste. I can read some evidence on this in a little bit here. But the same thing that happened in Australia happens in Canada. Just because you bring in smart people doesn't mean they fit in the businesses. It's better if they're already sponsored by the businesses themselves. And then you finally talked about the extension of the H-1B. Well, that's keeping the current US system. That isn't a reason to switch. That's a reason to keep the current program.
Okay, I have a couple of simple questions here. Would you agree that the overwhelming majority of people do not come into America through the H-1B visa program? And would you also agree to the fact that immigration is not necessarily based off of employers?
Well, the majority of economic migrants to the United States do come in off of the H-1B system. What was the second question?
The second question was basically, should employers regulate how people migrate to the United States?
No, employers should not regulate that. But in any system, what we want is for the jobs to, for people to come to where there are jobs. That's the goal of it. Government isn't supposed to say, we think you're the best, so we're going to bring you in. Or we think you're the worst, so we're not going to bring you in. Government is supposed to simply say, you are dangerous, so we're not going to allow you in. Or you don't fit in America, so we don't allow you in. That would be the role of government in this. But the businesses are the ones who say, we think you have merit, so we're going to give you this job. That's why the H-1B system works. And that's why you see that in Australia and Canada as well. When someone is sponsored by a business, those are the ones who stick and have jobs. If they are not sponsored by a business, even if they might be incredibly skilled, that doesn't mean they're going to stick and get a job. So that's why the numbers are different. That's why you have 13% unemployment if they're not sponsored versus 1% unemployment if they are.
Okay, so there's several points that I really have to disagree with my opponent on, and I want to clarify a couple of things. The first thing I want to clarify is there's about 600,000 or so immigrants who migrate legally to the United States every year. 65,000 of those are a part of the H-1B visa program. The overwhelming majority of immigrants do not come in through this program. Now, the important thing is I'm not advocating for the change in specific programs like the H-1B visa or our humanitarian refugee programs or our lottery, effectively diversity lottery programs. I'm advocating on just the normal immigration. Like if you apply to become a citizen of the United States, you should pass the merit-based system. Now, the important thing to note here is that my opponent's trying to defend the H-1B visa program, and I'm not advocating for a change in that at all. I'm advocating for the change in the overwhelming majority of people who come in just through the normal immigration means, not through the H-1B visa program. This is kind of a rabbit trail that my opponent's kind of gone off on that isn't relevant to the debate at all. We can go back and forth about whether or not expanding the H-1B visa program is relevant. I'm not saying, the important thing to note here is the reason for migration to the United States is people might be trying to seek a better life, but not necessarily because of them trying to seek employment under U.S. Employers. The point I'm trying to make is that the main system of immigration should be changed to be a point-based system. That also includes some amount of sponsorship. It's asking, can you be a good citizen in the United States? Are you intelligent? Do you have language proficiency in English? Things that are trying to judge how well will you actually fit into United States culture. This is not even really that much relevant to the H-1B visa program, and this is kind of a rabbit trail that we're going down on. With that in mind, let's address this Australia point. Australia actually is kind of a hybrid system that's not really like the Canadian system, not really like the American system, so it's not really that relevant. As to his point about Canada having a different economy, then sure, I accept that. But then we can't assume that therefore that should translate into the United States. He didn't show my point about how there are other ways you can simply fill the work void. It's because of these reasons that I believe I addressed his issues that I pass the mic.
So first of all, the thing that we have to make clear about my position is that I'm not saying that the 65,000 number is good. I'm saying we need to bring more of those 65,000 H-1B visas, allow more H-1B visas, and we solve for everything he's trying to solve for. Because it already does everything. It already is a merit-based system, that H-1B program. The only difference would simply be remove the cap that we currently have on the H-1B system, and we get everything he wants. But more than that, we actually do it better because the H-1B system requires sponsorship from an American business, which, as we've already seen, means that that will be preferable for the workers who can actually know they're going to have a job. That's a preferable system. And not only that, it is also preferable because we don't switch to this merit-based system, which discriminates against low-skilled workers, which America specifically needs. He hasn't shown you that America doesn't need low-skilled workers. We can look at more of this from the Bipartisan Policy Center, who says, quote, employers have reported difficulties finding workers in labor-intensive industries such as construction, hospitality, healthcare, and agriculture. For example, over 80% of construction firms are having difficulties finding workers. Lesser skilled immigration can not only help fill these labor shortages, but can also complement higher skilled native-born workers. Lesser skilled immigration fills a unique role in the labor market and is a crucial driver of economic growth in America, end quote. So the reason you should prefer the con is because we get every single benefit that my opponent gets, and we get them all better for the immigrants because they're sponsored by the businesses through the H-1B program. And we don't discriminate against lesser skilled workers. It's better in every single way. There's no advantage to switching to a merit-based system when you can get every single advantage and more by voting for the con.
I think my opponent's argument about getting every single advantage from a merit-based system is actually not really relevant to the round. And here's quite simply why. The HB1 visa program is effectively a merit-based system. It's where the employers decide what merits people have. This would still be applicable to a Canadian immigration system. The idea is, should we switch to a merit-based system where the majority of immigrants, basically, the smarter you are, the more your ability to establish yourself into American culture should determine if you should be able to come here, if you can get a job here. All that is relevant in a merit-based system. He is advocating over and over again for the H-1B visa program to be expanded. What he the United States. That's my point. Sponsorship is also included in this idea. The main point of the merit-based system, it's not just about jobs, it's about creating effective citizens, people with a decent educational background, people who can understand English well. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to have a PhD and therefore they can't work in low-skilled areas. It's trying to find the best people who will fit best into American society for the best well-being. The difference in why you should prefer my view of merit-based system over his, even if you support the H-1B visa program, you're still supporting a merit-based system, which would by definition still support the resolution. The reason you should prefer it is this doesn't just take into account the economic things. It takes into account what makes people good American citizens and what best can we do to bring in the best possible options. That's what I want you to take away from this round, is that the HB1 visa program is kind of a smaller version of a merit-based system. Either way, whether you support H-1B visa or just a merit-based system in general, you're still supporting the resolution.
My opponent seems to think that we have to be in conflict on visas, but that simply doesn't make sense. In fact, Manuel Orozco, senior fellow at Harvard University Center for International Development, points out that, quote, the real choice for immigration reform is not between a family-based and a points-based system. The two are not mutually exclusive. An informed debate about immigration must start from the recognition that different visa categories support each other, end quote. And that is really what I'm talking about here in this round. We can have the H-1B visa that we already have, just allow more of it. We can have the H-2A visa, which allows temporary guest workers to come in, the lesser skilled workers. But if we switch to my opponent's plan, then we don't have the H-2A visa. We don't have any of those other forms of visas. We just have merit-based. But the problem with that is that we lose out on the lesser skilled workers who wouldn't get through the merit-based system. There is no reason to switch to a merit-based immigration policy because that simply doesn't make sense. America needs lower skilled workers and higher skilled workers. We need both. That's the foundation of the economic aspect of immigration. So I am advocating that we keep the lower skilled immigrant visas. We keep those. We don't switch to a merit-based policy that would exclude those people. And we also increase the H-1B system that we already have. We just get rid of the quota that we currently have, which is causing a problem. If we do these two things together, keep the current low-skilled labor, but also enable the high-skilled labor to come, we solve every single one of his issues. We solve every single one of his issues better because the H-1B visa is preferable to the Canadian merit-based system. And we also keep the lower skilled labor that America relies on. It is simply preferable. You should certainly vote for the con.
What I want to make clear in this speech is quite simple. My opponent's view of the resolution is flawed. When I brought up the point about a resolution analysis of we're debating on principle, should we try and pursue a Canadian immigration system, I was never advocating a policy that abolished all other forms of visas. For example, Canada, even though they have a merits-based system, still have humanitarian refugee visas and situations like that. It's just saying for the main form of immigration, what should we change? He hasn't defended the main form of immigration. He's defended H-1B visa. I have never, ever claimed that that would be abolished. That could still exist whether you support the resolution or not. That's the problem. He agreed to my resolution analysis point. We're debating this on principle. I didn't present a policy that said we would abolish all other forms of ideas here, all other systems. I'm saying the main system, we should move to a merit-based. He must show you why the chain migration system is better than the merit-based, not the H-1B visa. I'm not talking about creating good workers. I'm talking about creating good citizens. You can still support a change to a Canadian immigration system and still have the H-1B visa program. This isn't an either-or situation. That's the problem. He is conflating supporting the resolution with abolishing other forms of visa immigration, which is not anywhere stated. I specifically said, and he agreed to, we're just debating this on principle, should this be something we should attack? And I talked about, we're obviously talking about the main form of immigration, one that's not relevant to like temporary work visas or something that has to do like humanitarian refugees. That's not a part of this debate. He never explained to you why the current system that I'm advocating to change is better. He talked about the HB1 visa system, but I have never said that we were going to get rid of that. So I don't think that's relevant in this round.
Fundamental difference between what my opponent is representing and what I'm representing is that if you are a merit-based system, you allow people who have the most merit. So they have to have a bachelor's degree. They have to have a certain age requirement. They have to have certain speech requirements. But that is fundamentally contradictory to what America needs. That's why we can't go with that, because America still needs the lower skilled workers who would not get through the merit-based system. We've seen several pieces of evidence. Let me read one more here. This from David Beyer, immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute, says, quote, low-skilled immigrant workers are vital contributors to the economy. Rather than treating them as superfluous or parasitic, America must begin to see them as the base on which we all depend, end quote. We've seen multiple times that the low-skilled workers do matter, that we are having difficulty filling these low-skilled immigrant areas in the American economy. We still need low-skilled immigration. Therefore, we should not switch to a merit-based system that only lets in the supposed most qualified candidates. We don't want someone from Cambridge to come in and work the agriculture fields in California. That's not a preferable system. This is why we should stick with the current American system, allow the current ability to have low-skilled workers who wouldn't fit in the merit-based system be able to come in and still contribute, but also expand the high-skilled area as well. We can keep the current American system. It'll work better than if we switch to a merit-based system. That is why you should prefer the con in this round.
I want to ask you a quick question about, you mentioned two different immigration programs, the H-1B visa and the H-1A visa. Am I correct in assuming that the H-1A visa is referring to lower skilled workers?
The H-2A and the H-2B are seasonal workers. So the H-2A, the A stands for agriculture. So those would be the seasonal short-term guest workers. The H-2B is usually a little bit higher skilled, but they're also short-term as well.
Okay, so I also have another question. Have I ever advocated for the abolishment of any work visa programs?
Merit-based system discriminates against the lower skilled workers. I am saying that is a problem. We should not be preferring that. We should have the current system that America already has, not switch to Canada's system, keep the H-1B system and expand it, keep the H-2A system as well.
Okay. In this kind of final speech, I want to start off by quoting, I think, something that's very relevant to the debate round. When Abraham Lincoln once said that we are a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I think that's going to be very relevant when we discuss several things. Now, before I really get into my main two encouragements or reasons you should support the resolution, I present one clarification point, and that is that my opponent's been arguing something not relevant to the resolution this entire time. He's consistently stated that somehow if you follow a Canadian immigration system, that would be abolishing the H-1B or the H-2A or the H-2B systems. That's not true. I have never advocated for that. We agreed in the resolution analysis that we're trying to discuss this on principle. His next point then that it was discriminating against low-skilled workers, they can still enter through the seasonal systems. He also never responded to the point. I said these could easily be filled through other mechanisms, like the fact that we have a large amount of illegal immigrants or the ever-expanding lower class in the United States that could fill this. He states this idea that somehow if we implement a merit-based system, we're only going to get like Cambridge scholars. No. That's not even like the biggest point. The biggest point getter is if you can speak English. Like naturally your language proficiency, like in English and Spanish, is naturally going to say, you might be a better fit for the United States. The first encouragement I want to point down here is that of economic benefits. His only argument against economic benefits was saying that we're moving low-skilled laborers, which he himself, which not only did he not respond to my points, and we still have the seasonal programs, the merit-based system isn't meant to necessarily provide workers. The system is just meant to, our citizens who are just coming to the United States, not necessarily to get a job, are these people, can they make good citizens? And he never responded to my point about naturally in countries where you see smarter populations with more skilled laborers, economic growth is a better long-term policy. My opponent's focus is on the short term, not the long term. My second encouragement is that of American advocacy, something that we kind of didn't really talk about much in this round, but I really want to sum up quite simply. Again, going back to the point about what the purpose of government. Government has a moral and legal obligation to follow the needs of the wants of the people who it represents. He said that's populism, yes, but the American government is supposed to represent its people. 80% of Americans want a merit-based program to be the main program. They don't necessarily want to get rid of the H-1B visa program. They want a merit-based program to be the main source of immigration. It is because of this reason, I strongly urge you to affirm the resolution. And America should follow an Canadian immigration system because America wants to follow that system.
All right, so just to sum up here, in order to have a merit-based system, you are automatically saying that the government is responsible for saying who can come into the country and who would be the best citizens to get jobs. The problem is the government is not as good of a job, is not as good at this as the businesses themselves are, which is why the H-1B system that currently works is where the employers themselves say, these are the people we want to hire. These are the people who we think have merit. Now give them the specific thing that they need. That is the system that works. That is the system that I am advocating in America. We just need to remove the cap on that and we have the simple problem solved. In Australia, where we saw this already, when they are sponsored by an employer, they are able to get jobs and they hold those jobs. But if they aren't sponsored by an employer and the government simply picks them, the numbers are much worse. They don't wind up getting the jobs that they are supposed to have. This is why it is preferable to have the current US system. Now, he's saying that he's not really advocating that much of a difference from the status quo, is that he's keeping the current visas. Well, the problem is a merit-based system does discriminate against those who, for instance, don't speak English. And yet, we would still want those workers. We need those lower-skilled workers. We've seen multiple pieces of evidence that America needs lower-skilled workers. We can get every single advantage that my opponent is claiming, every single one of them, with the current US visa system. We do not need to switch to a merit-based system. We do not need the government to determine who has the most amount of merit. Instead, we can allow the businesses to say, these are the people I want, give them a visa. That is the solution. That is what the United States already has. We just need to allow for that current system. To conclude, my opponent has actually agreed that the current US visa systems work. Let's stick with those visa systems. That's all we need. That's why we should not switch to